Why deep thinkers struggle in modern society. The wound that has no name. What happens to a mind that thinks too deeply in a world that rewards those who don't think at all? Not intelligence, not knowledge, depth. The kind of person who cannot have a conversation without needing to reach the bottom of it. Who feels the weight of questions that most people never ask themselves. Who looks at the noise of modern life, the endless scroll, the shallow small talk, the performative happiness, and feels something that is difficult to name. Not sadness exactly, not anger. Something closer to a quiet, persistent alienation. Like everyone around you is watching a movie and laughing at scenes you simply cannot find funny. And the longer you sit with that feeling, the more certain you become that the distance between you and the room is not something that can be closed by trying harder. You have tried to fix this. You have tried being more social, more present, more normal. You have smiled when you were supposed to smile, talked about things that felt meaningless, and pretended to care about conversations that left you emptier than before they started. You have told yourself that it was a phase, that you would eventually find your rhythm, that the disconnection would soften with time. And still, the feeling returned, because you were never solving the real problem. You were just learning to perform the solution. Here is what no one ever told you: there is nothing wrong with you. But the world has been treating you as if there is. And by now, part of you has started to believe it. Not loudly, not in a way you would admit out loud, but quietly, in the way you hold yourself back in conversations, in the way you pre-edit your thoughts before speaking them, in the way you sometimes wonder if the exhaustion you carry is simply the price of being who you are. This video will not tell you how to adapt. It will not give you a list of tips to function better in a world that was not designed for the way your mind works. What it will do is something far more important. It will show you exactly why you feel the way you feel, where this depth comes from, what it has been costing you, and why the very thing that has made your life harder may be the most significant thing about you. But before we get there, I need to ask you something. And I need you to sit with this question, not rush past it, because the answer will change the way you see everything that comes after. What if you were never the problem? The world was not built for you. Let's be honest about something that most self-help content will never say out loud. The modern world was not designed for depth. It was designed for speed, for compliance, for the kind of mind that can receive information without questioning it, follow a system without examining it, and find satisfaction in things that, to you, have always felt fundamentally empty. This is not a conspiracy. It is not something to be angry about. It is simply the result of a civilization that optimized itself for productivity, consumption, and social cohesion, none of which require depth, and all of which are quietly disrupted by it. Think about the institutions that shaped you. School rewarded the students who could memorize and reproduce, not the ones who asked why the information mattered in the first place. Work rewards the employees who execute efficiently, not the ones who stop to question whether what is being executed is worth doing at all. Social environments reward those who are easy, light, agreeable, not those who feel compelled to bring honesty into spaces that were designed for comfort. And religion, politics, culture, nearly every organized system of meaning that exists, functions best when its participants accept its premises rather than interrogate them. And you move through all of these systems feeling, at some level, like you were failing at something everyone else found effortless. Not because you lacked capability, but because the metric by which success was being measured was never built with your kind of mind in mind. Here is what that does to a person over time. You begin to develop a split self. There is the version of you that the world sees, the one who has learned to compress, to perform, to operate within the bandwidth that social and professional environments demand. And there is the version of you that exists beneath that, the one who is constantly processing at a frequency that no one around you seems to share or even notice. Living in that split is exhausting in a way that is almost impossible to articulate, because from the outside, everything looks fine. You are functioning. You are productive. You are, by most measurable standards, doing well. But inside, there is a persistent sense of friction, a feeling that you are always translating yourself into a language that diminishes something essential in the process, that you are always giving the world a version of you that is smaller, simpler, and quieter than what actually exists. And the cruelest part is this: the better you become at the performance, the more invisible the real cost becomes, to everyone else and eventually to yourself. You stop expecting to be fully understood, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, almost imperceptibly. You lower the threshold of what you look for in a conversation, in a relationship, in a moment of connection. You begin to mistake the absence of conflict for the presence of belonging. You call it maturity. You call it learning to let things go. But underneath, what you have actually done is learn to need less, so that the gap between what you need and what the world offers stops feeling quite so devastating. This adaptation is not weakness. It is survival. It is what an intelligent mind does when it realizes that the environment cannot meet it where it lives. But survival and flourishing are not the same thing, and at some point, perhaps at this very moment, the distance between the two becomes impossible to ignore. Because here is the truth about a mind built for depth living in a world optimized for surface. The world will never come to you. It does not know how. It was not built with the architecture to reach where you live. And waiting for it to do so is not patience. It is a slow erosion of everything that makes you who you are. The world was not built for you. That sentence can land two different ways. It can feel like a wound, confirmation of everything you have quietly suspected about your place in this life. Or it can feel like a release. Permission, finally, to stop trying to fit inside a structure that was never designed to contain you. By the end of this video, I want it to feel like the second. But first, we need to go somewhere most people are not willing to go. We need to look at what this life, this constant friction between depth and a world that cannot hold it, has actually done to you. Not in theory, not in the abstract, but in the specific, quiet, daily ways that you may not have allowed yourself to fully acknowledge yet. Because you cannot build something new on top of damage you have never looked at directly. The hidden cost of seeing too much. No one warns you about what it actually costs to feel everything deeply. Not in the poetic sense, not in the romanticized version of sensitivity that gets quoted on social media between aesthetic photographs. In the real, unglamorous, daily sense. The version that happens at 2 a.m. when your mind refuses to stop processing a conversation that ended 6 hours ago. The version that happens in a crowded room where you are smiling at the right moments, while simultaneously aware of 3 different emotional currents moving beneath the surface of the interaction that no one else seems to notice. The version that happens when something beautiful, a piece of music, a sentence in a book, a particular quality of evening light, hits you with an intensity that feels almost violent, and you look around and realize that no one else in the room was touched by it at all. That is the hidden cost. Not the big dramatic suffering, the quiet, cumulative weight of experiencing life at a frequency that the people around you simply do not share. And it accumulates in specific ways that I want to name precisely, because precision matters here. Vague language lets us nod along without truly confronting what is real. So let's be specific. The first cost is relational. When you process at the depth you do, genuine connection becomes simultaneously the thing you need most and the thing that is hardest to find. Surface conversations do not just bore you, they drain you. Because you are not just participating in them. You are aware of their emptiness while participating in them. You are present on the surface while simultaneously conscious of everything that is not being said, everything that could be explored but won't be, every layer of meaning that is being deliberately avoided in favor of comfort and ease. That double awareness is exhausting, and over time it produces a particular kind of loneliness, not the loneliness of being without people, but the loneliness of being consistently, fundamentally unreachable by them, of being in the room and invisible at the same time. The second cost is emotional. Deep thinkers do not just think deeply, they feel deeply. And the relationship between those two things creates a specific kind of inner turbulence that most people will never understand. You do not just experience an emotion, you experience the emotion, the awareness of the emotion, the analysis of the emotion, the questioning of whether the emotion is proportionate, the awareness that you are questioning the emotion, and the exhaustion of having done all of that before, Most people would have even registered that they felt something in the first place. You are always several steps ahead of your own experience, which means you are also always, in some way, slightly disconnected from it, living it and observing it simultaneously, never quite able to simply be inside a moment without part of you standing at a distance, watching. The third cost is existential, because a mind that cannot stop asking why eventually turns that question on the things that most people use as anchors: purpose, identity, the structures that give ordinary life its meaning. And when those structures cannot survive the scrutiny, when the career feels hollow under examination, when the social roles feel performed rather than felt, when the milestones that were supposed to feel significant arrive and feel strangely empty, the ground beneath you becomes uncertain in a way that is very difficult to explain to someone who has never felt it. It is not depression, though it can look like it from the outside. It is something closer to a chronic, low-level vertigo. The feeling of standing at the edge of questions that have no clean answers and having to live there, permanently, with no real option to step back. These three costs, relational, emotional, existential, are not separate. They compound each other. The loneliness intensifies the emotional turbulence. The emotional turbulence deepens the existential questioning. The existential questioning reinforces the loneliness, because there are very few people with whom those questions can even be shared. And here is what this compounding produces over years in a person who has never had any of this named or understood: a quiet but profound belief that there is something fundamentally wrong with them. Not a conscious belief, not one they would state out loud, but a belief that lives in the body, in the nervous system, in the way they move through rooms and hold themselves back from saying what they are actually thinking. A belief that has been constructed brick by brick from every moment they were too much for someone. Every conversation that ended with them feeling like they had somehow miscalibrated. Every time their depth was met with discomfort, distance, or the particular cruelty of being told to lighten up. That belief is the real cost. Everything else is a symptom of it. And the reason I am naming it here, directly, without softening it, is because what cannot be seen cannot be changed. And what you are about to understand, in the chapters that follow, is that this belief, as deeply as it may be embedded, is not the truth. It is a conclusion drawn from incomplete data. It is what happens when a mind of extraordinary depth is evaluated by ordinary standards and found, unsurprisingly, to not quite fit. But fitting was never the point. The point, the one we are finally arriving at, is something far more important than fitting. And it begins with understanding not just what your depth has cost you, but what it has quietly and visibly been building all along. What they called a flaw was always a blueprint. History does not remember the people who fit. Think about that for a moment. Not as a motivational statement. Those are cheap and easy and require nothing of you. Think about it as a literal, verifiable observation about how human civilization has actually moved forward. Every significant shift in how we understand ourselves, our world, our possibilities, every one of them came from a mind that could not stop at the surface. A mind that looked at what everyone else had accepted as fixed and felt, with a certainty they could not always explain, that there was something beneath it worth excavating. That the consensus was incomplete. That the obvious answer was not the real answer. That the question itself needed to be reframed before any honest answer was possible. These were not comfortable people. They were not easy to be around. They did not make the social environments they inhabited feel lighter or simpler. They made them feel more complex, more demanding, more honest, which is to say they made them feel exactly the way you make the rooms you walk into feel. And the world, at first, almost always responded the same way it has responded to you, with discomfort, with dismissal, with the quiet but unmistakable message that it would all be easier if they would just stop going so deep. Most of them didn't. And that refusal, that inability really, because it was never truly a choice, is the reason we remember them at all. Now I want to be careful here, because this is the moment where lesser content would pivot to flattery, would tell you that you are special, that you are destined for greatness, that your sensitivity is a superpower, and I am not going to do that. Not because it is false, but because flattery without understanding is just another form of not being seen. And you have had enough of not being seen. What I want to offer instead is something more useful than flattery. I want to offer you a reframe that is grounded in something real. The traits that have made your life most difficult are not separate from your greatest capacities. They are the same thing, experienced from two different angles. The depth that makes ordinary conversation feel hollow is the same depth that allows you to understand people at a level they cannot access in themselves. The sensitivity that makes noise unbearable and conflict feel catastrophic is the same sensitivity that makes you capable of perceiving beauty, meaning, and human truth with a precision that most people will never know. The refusal to accept surface answers, the one that has made you difficult, restless, and perpetually unsatisfied, is the same refusal that, directed correctly, becomes the engine of everything original, everything honest, everything worth building. Your so-called flaws are not design errors. They are features of a specific kind of mind that was built for a specific kind of work, not the work that gets rewarded in the short term, not the work that is easy to explain at a dinner party, but the work that actually matters, the work of understanding, of creating, of asking the questions that need to be asked even when, especially when, the answer is going to make everyone in the room uncomfortable. The problem was never that you were built wrong. The problem was that you were handed the wrong blueprint and spent years trying to construct something from it that your materials were never designed to make. You kept measuring yourself against an architecture that was drawn for someone else entirely. And now, perhaps for the first time, someone is telling you that the blueprint was always yours to write. But a blueprint without a foundation is just a drawing. And the foundation we need to build, the one that everything else depends on, is something that most deep thinkers have systematically, almost compulsively, avoided. Understanding themselves, the one you never let yourself be. There is a version of you that has never fully existed, not because you lacked the capacity for it, but because the world encountered you before you encountered yourself, before you had the language, the framework, the permission to understand what you were and what you needed. The world had already begun the work of telling you. And the story it told was efficient and consistent and almost entirely wrong. Too sensitive, too intense, too much, not enough, too serious, too complicated, too difficult to reach, too easy to hurt, too slow to let go, too quick to feel. And because you were young and because the voices were many, and because human beings are social creatures who calibrate their sense of self against the responses they receive from others, you listened, not all at once, not consciously, but slowly, the way water shapes stone. You began to edit yourself, to preemptively compress the parts of you that had been received with discomfort, to lead with the version of yourself that the room could hold, and keep the rest somewhere quieter and less exposed. This is not a failure of character. This is what intelligent, sensitive people do when the environment cannot meet them. They adapt. They become skilled at reading what is needed and providing it. They develop an almost uncanny ability to be whoever the situation requires, while quietly, privately, carrying the weight of who they actually are with nowhere to set it down. The psychological term for this is masking. And while it is most commonly discussed in the context of neurodivergence, the truth is that it is far more widespread than any clinical category can contain. Any person who has ever felt fundamentally different from the environment they were placed in, and who has been intelligent enough to recognize that difference and strategic enough to conceal it, has practiced some form of masking, has learned, in other words, to make their inner world invisible so that their outer life can function. And the cost of that, accumulated over years, over decades, is something that goes far beyond exhaustion. It is a loss of self-knowledge. Because when you spend long enough performing a version of yourself, the performance begins to feel like the only available data. You stop knowing with confidence what you actually think. Separate from what you have learned to think in order to be acceptable. You stop knowing what you actually feel. Separate from what you have learned to express in order to be understood. You stop knowing what you actually want, separate from what you have learned to want in order to belong. The line between who you are and who you learn to be becomes so blurred that the question itself starts to feel dangerous. You become, in the most precise sense of the word, a stranger to yourself, highly functional, impressively capable, and quietly, profoundly disconnected from the person who exists beneath the performance. Here is the question that follows from all of this, and I want you to stay with it because it is not rhetorical. Who are you when no one needs anything from you? Not who you are at work, or in your friendships, or in the roles you fill for other people. Not the competent one, or the perceptive one, or the one who holds everything together. Not the person other people describe when they talk about you, because that description, however accurate, is built from data that was filtered through the performance. Who are you in the silence? In the spaces between obligations? In the moments when the mask is down not because you chose to remove it, but because there was simply no one there to perform for? Most deep thinkers find that question deeply uncomfortable, because the honest answer for many of them is, I am not entirely sure. And that uncertainty, in a person who has spent their entire life understanding everything else, is one of the most disorienting things they have ever encountered. But that disorientation is not a problem. It is a doorway. Because on the other side of it is something you have been carrying your entire life without ever fully being able to access. Not a new self. Not a reinvented self. The original one. The one that existed before the editing began. The one that felt everything without apologizing for it, thought everything without shrinking it, and moved through the world with a kind of raw, unmediated authenticity that the performance has been quietly covering for years. That version of you is not gone. It was never destroyed. It was never even lost. It was just waiting, patiently, stubbornly, with a kind of quiet certainty, for someone to finally tell you that it was safe to come back. And that is exactly what the final chapter of this video is going to do. How to finally come home to yourself. Everything we have covered until now has been diagnosis. Necessary, honest, and I hope, relieving in the way that it feels relieving when someone finally names what you have been living with but could not articulate. But diagnosis without direction is just a more sophisticated form of being stuck. So this is where we turn. Not toward a list of habits, not toward a morning routine or a productivity framework or any of the other structures that self-improvement content offers as substitutes for the deeper work. What I want to offer here is something more fundamental than all of that. A set of truths, 3 of them, that if genuinely integrated rather than merely understood intellectually, have the capacity to change the entire orientation of a life like yours. The first truth: depth is not a problem to be managed. It is an orientation to be inhabited. For most of your life, the implicit goal has been to manage your depth, to contain it, regulate it, make it acceptable to the environments that could not hold it. And that goal, however unconsciously pursued, has produced a relationship with yourself that is fundamentally adversarial. A part of you is always monitoring another part of you, always assessing whether this is too much, whether this is appropriate, whether this needs to be dialed back before the room notices. That monitoring is not self-awareness, it is self-surveillance, and it consumes an enormous amount of the energy that was meant for something else. For creating, for connecting, for building the kind of life that actually fits the mind you were given. The shift begins when you stop treating your depth as a variable to be adjusted and start treating it as the fixed point around which everything else is organized. Not recklessly, not without discernment about context and relationship, but fundamentally, at the level of identity, this is how I am built, and I am building my life to reflect that rather than to conceal it. That shift sounds simple. It is not. It requires dismantling a belief system that was constructed over years and reinforced by hundreds of small moments of correction and dismissal. But it begins with a single, radical act of acceptance. Not the passive, resigned kind, but the active, deliberate kind. The kind that says, I see exactly what I am, and I am no longer willing to apologize for it. The second truth: the relationships that matter are the ones that can meet you where you live. One of the quietest and most damaging habits of deep thinkers is the habit of adapting downward in relationships, of meeting others at the level they are comfortable with, and then wondering why they feel unseen, of choosing connection over authenticity, and then discovering slowly that what they built was a connection to a version of themselves that does not fully exist. The truth, uncomfortable, necessary, is this: not everyone is capable of knowing you. Not as a judgment of their worth, simply as an acknowledgement of the reality that depth recognizes depth, and its absence is not something that can be overcome by effort or goodwill or enough time. This means that the work of building a life that fits you is, in significant part, the work of ruthless curation, of being willing to let certain relationships remain at the level they are naturally able to reach, without resentment and without pretending that level is enough, of actively, intentionally seeking the people, and they exist in smaller numbers than you might like, but they exist, who do not need you to compress yourself in order for them to feel comfortable, who meet your depth not with discomfort, but with recognition, who make you feel, perhaps for the first time in a long time, like the full version of yourself is not just tolerable, but genuinely, specifically wanted. Those relationships are not found by accident. They are found by showing up as yourself, fully, without the performance, and allowing that authenticity to function as a filter. The people who stay when you stop performing are the ones worth staying for. The third truth: your depth only becomes meaningful when it moves from internal experience to external expression. This is the one that is hardest to hear, and the one that matters most. A mind like yours, turned entirely inward, becomes a prison. The same capacity for depth that gives you access to extraordinary insight also gives you access to extraordinary suffering when it has nowhere to go, when it loops back on itself, when it processes and reprocesses and analyzes and questions in an endless interior cycle with no output, no creation, no contribution to anything beyond itself. The antidote to that, the real one, not the superficial one, is expression, in whatever form is native to you. Writing, building, teaching, creating, conversations of real substance with people of real depth. The deliberate, disciplined practice of taking what lives inside you and making it exist in the world outside you, not because the world deserves it, not as an act of generosity toward a world that has not always been generous toward you, but because expression is the only thing that transforms depth from a weight into a force. It is the mechanism by which everything that has cost you, the sensitivity, the intensity, the refusal to accept the surface, becomes something that justifies its own existence, something that could not have been built any other way, something that only a mind like yours could have made. You were not given this mind to suffer quietly and alone with it. You were given it to do something with it that a simpler mind could not have done. That has always been true. You are only now perhaps ready to believe it. The question, the final one, and the one I want to leave with you, is not whether you are capable of that. You already know you are. The question is whether you are finally willing to stop waiting for the world to make it easy and start building it anyway. Because the world will not come to you. But everything worth having in this life was built by someone who moved toward it anyway. That someone has always been you. You just needed someone to remind you. A last word before you go. If this video found you at the right moment, and something tells me it did, then you already know what to do with what you just heard. Not tomorrow. Not when the conditions are better, or the timing is cleaner, or the fear is smaller. Now. With the exact life you have, the exact depth you carry, and the exact mind that has always been more asset than liability, even when everything around you suggested otherwise. The version of you that has been waiting beneath the performance does not need better circumstances. It needs your permission. The world was not built for you. Build something better.